Hey, I've been sick the last week, and I wanted a pretty easy video to make, so we're going to do something a bit different this time and talk about a PC I actually use. This is my HP Envy 750-247C. I got this computer brand new in 2016, and it is what I call the Workbench PC, because it lives under the workbench that I use to make all of this garbage. It fulfills various tasks that I might need to accomplish. Over here, the most important one is video recording with my capture card. Pretty much any piece of footage that I've used my capture card to record has been all done through this computer. I have another desktop, but because of how my room is laid out, it's physically impossible for me to use it where the bench is. So this computer is pretty important. But because it's a computer I actually use and therefore don't show at all, it's pretty much just a random collection of parts that I either already had or cost me very little. A lot of the hardware in this was modified from the original, and most of the original parts are gone, being used in other systems, so I had to pretty much build a whole new computer in this with the existing motherboard. In fact, even the chassis is different, because this is actually an NV700 case instead of the 750. The chassis for this is pretty much the same as the original case, except this one has full-size optical drive bays, which is another pretty important thing I do with this. No other PC I daily drive has a DVD drive at all. This one has two. It also has a full-size card reader, 4 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports, and microphone and headphone jacks on the, well, front and top in this case. It is also a pretty standard PC, allowing for aftermarket parts. What a concept. The motherboard I/O is pretty basic. There's 2-channel audio, 2 more USB 3.0 ports, 2 HDMI ports, gigabit Ethernet, and 4 more USB 2.0 ports. And the original GPU also has a DVI, HDMI, and display ports. This system does have some ventilation on the sides, but since I used to have a bigger GPU in this, I tried to jerry-rig another cooling fan into one of these intakes, because there's not a lot of room in this case for air to move around because of this rat's nest. I replaced the original power supply with a CX650M forever ago, because I used to have a bigger GPU in this computer. Technically a semi-modular power supply, but it doesn't really help in this case. Cable management just isn't really an option. The rest of the chassis is pretty similar to the Pavilion A6300F, including the optical drive mechanism. Like I mentioned, this has two pretty standard 16x DVD RW drives. I wanted to put Blu-ray drives in this just because I thought it would be funny, but I haven't. Also, the computer only had one optical drive. I added the other one in later. This also has 3 hard drive mounts in it. I'm only using 2 as is. I have these old Seagate Barracuda LP 1.5 terabyte drives that I threw in this. It's pretty much just for scratch storage, because these drives are kind of crappy, but they do the job. So you're never going to believe the timing on this. I'm still actively working on this video as I'm recording this clip, and when I went to turn the computer on this morning, one of these hard drives decided to start clicking. I think it's this one, but it's hard to tell because they are identical. You can hear right now they're working fine, both of them are powered up, and it only happened for like, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds, and then it went back to normal, but then it started doing it later. You can see one of these is clearly not happy, and the other drive is fine. Still not really good. You can see that these don't have that many hours on them, so I'm not really sure if they're going to be fine. I've been trying to get a clip to use in this video, and I haven't been able to get one, because that's what happens when you pull the camera out. There are things on these drives, so as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm going to start taking the data off of those drives, and they're probably not going to be in this computer anymore. As you saw, they are Seagate drives, so I'm not really surprised that this happened. I knew I was kind of cutting it close by using these. A lot of Seagate drives from the early 2010s, these are from 2011 I think, are known for kind of being crap, and that's certainly the case here. The motherboard is unsurprisingly very basic. It's the IPM17-TP. No idea who made it, maybe Foxconn. It's a Z170 chipset board, so it's a Skylake system. So this has a Core i3-6100 dual-core CPU with a pretty basic cooler that's technically a tower. It at least has a copper cold plate. For an i3, it's fine, and in fact, this originally had an i7, and it technically worked for that. Speaking of little coolers, how about the cooler for the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 745? This is an OEM GPU that HP used in this computer originally. It's like one of the few original parts I still have. It's better than integrated graphics, and it technically works for what I'm doing with the computer, but this is probably the other biggest thing I want to upgrade on it eventually. There are 4 RAM slots on this board. This has 16 gigabytes of some of the worst DDR4 2400 megatransfers per second RAM I have ever bought, but it's an OEM computer, so who cares about the RAM quality? There's also a 512 gigabyte NVMe Intel Optane SSD on this board. This also has built-in wireless. The card is above the NVMe slot, but there are no antennas in this case anymore, so while it works, it's very inconsistent. This has a spare PCI Express X1 slot, so my plan is to eventually get one of those basic wireless solutions that can just plug into the slot, but I haven't had one available for this computer. If you couldn't already tell, when it comes to personal machines, I get pretty lazy with the part selection. Also, somewhere in this rat's nest, there are a total of 5 SATA ports, so I could add another hard drive to this if I wanted to, and be able to populate every bay in the system. So yeah, that's about it. That's a pretty basic look at the internals of this system. I could go even deeper, but that's kind of the important things. But there are quite a lot of options with this board. It's really not something you expect with a pre-built these days. Also, I put in a really basic RGB fan in the rear, because why not? Since this is the capture PC, it's kind of hard to record it directly, but since it's an OEM PC, the BIOS is pretty basic. It's from 2018, and the skin is very old school, but it covers all the basics, and like with a lot of other HP computers, there's also diagnostics built into this as well. As for the OS, it is unsurprisingly Windows 11. I can't actually use Linux on here because there are multiple pieces of software I need on this computer that are Windows only, unfortunately. This is not technically an officially supported Windows 11 PC, but it works just fine on here. My capture card is only 1080p 60 FPS capable. It's some old Elgato thing, which is probably the reason why I'm able to get away with using this computer that doesn't seem very high-end. Doesn't mean that it's not working hard while doing it, but it can do it. Only a handful of times I've ever actually had this system not be able to keep up with what I'm recording, and a lot of the times it's usually gaming. Thermals are also okay. The biggest problem is that GPU, which can get pretty warm, and also the NVMe SSD. This was never meant to have one and this drive I put in here can get pretty hot in the system because there's no heatsink. Now I have some Cinebench data for this computer because I used it as a comparison for the A8 Lenovo ThinkCentre that I just covered, and this is a bit useful for showing how much of a hit the performance of this computer takes just by recording on it. So while I can do that, I can't do a lot else on this without the recording being impacted because the parts are just barely good enough to be able to make this work. Even just watching YouTube on this can be enough to tank the performance on this computer. Since the hardware is not that great, I don't play games very often on this computer because it's not really necessary, but I do keep some games installed on those hard drives. This has gaming potential. It's better than that ThinkCentre I just covered, but the CPU and GPU are working pretty hard. While the GTX 745 is kind of a joke, like I said, it's still better than integrated graphics. For older games, the system does just fine, but again, the GPU is really being maxed out in this computer. Which is why, like I said, I want to upgrade the CPU and GPU eventually in this computer. But a lot of modern parts are still pretty expensive. When I actually have to spend that money on things for the channel instead, it gets kind of difficult to justify this. Because ultimately, for the tasks this needs to do, it does work. And it works good enough that I'm not really concerned about it. Doesn't mean that it's ideal, but it works. In fact, the most intensive thing that this computer does outside of video capturing is YouTube playback. And it can handle that just fine.